Hi, my name is Richard Perkins, and this week's discussion is going to be about white privilege and how it manifests in different aspects of society. Being born into white skin obviously comes with it a lot of unearned privileges. We've reviewed this with Peggy McIntosh, this invisible knapsack, right? Privileges to hold space, to take up space, to be ever present in that space at the detriment of other identities. I've had to look at myself too and my own whiteness, something that was really sort of not aware. I was unaware of my whiteness and of the racial, my own racial background. Consider myself as being something without race. My biggest identity marker my whole life has been my queer identity, right? And as Hinkson notes in our readings, general discussions around queer identities exclude intersecting identities like race and gender, right? And this focus on the history of white gay men leads to a loss of coalition building among all queer people. While we may find solace with people of color on the basis of shared oppressed queer identities, our insistence on maintaining white supremacy, overt or implicit, means that we never fully embrace the full breadth of what it means to be queer and instead perpetuate white privilege and supremacy. As an oppressed queer population, we cling to the one privilege and advantage that we have, right? And that is being white. White queer Americans are certainly disadvantaged for their sexuality, but they're still white and have a racial advantage compared to non-white queer people. Even further, Hinkson points out that the exclusion of non-whites within the Eurocentric queer narrative has really resulted in lower acceptance of queer identities among queers of color in their own racial or ethnic protective communities. Queerness in such communities is often seen as a white issue, infiltrating their communities. And why would this not be the perception when the shelves of queer history are so frequently lined with stories of white gay oppression and liberation in what Hinkson calls white homonormativity, which even the most progressive of white peers perpetuate, right? We perpetuate this racial stratification and exclusion. At our table, you are foremost a queer person. We overlook the other vital identities to the detriment of our movement. Here we have Marsha P. Johnson, right? She was one of the foremothers of the queer movement. She was at Stonewall. And through learning things like this, I've come to learn that white people have always controlled this narrative. And white queer people know that acceptance and positive public opinion are far more palatable to other white people if we too are white. And therefore, my own queer journey has been made less oppressive. I carry with me, as Peggy McIntosh would phrase, that invisible knapsack, privileged white provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. That's a direct quote. That while absolutely bathed in the colors of gay pride, I am nonetheless coated in the armor of my protective whiteness. Of course, our queer history has also overrepresented cisgender maleness. Certainly the post-Stonewall era of AIDS that disproportionately affected cis gay men played a role in redirecting the queer narrative away from women. But in general, a woman's identity has remained erased by the greater queer story. Combined with the erasure of racial identity in queer history, Ali Mohammed argues that queer women of color experience even greater marginalization. And to compound matters, queer women of color, both separately and intersectionally, have been excluded from feminist narratives, highlighting the urgent need for decolonizing the narrative and centering intersectional identities, right? Not everyone experiences gayness, the white way, the gay cisgender male way. And my identity remains the dominant narrative. Marsilia also points out how women of color are one of the most oppressed populations. So adding queerness to the mix only serves to compound this oppression. Now add to that the identity of trans women of color. As you see here, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, the same woman whose fight was co-opted and sanitized by white gay men who promptly excluded them from the movement. Marsilia points out that trans women of color are also at a significantly higher risk of violence because of their extreme number of oppressed intersectional identities. Being excluded from the trans exclusionary feminist movement, known as TERFs, being excluded from the greater racial liberation movement, Black liberation movement, being excluded from the LGB movement. That's LGB without the T. And there's a large movement in play with that. Marsilia points out the process of gay liberation is often emphasized male gay culture and whiteness while silencing, and I might add, harming and killing lesbian and trans people of color. Thank you so much.